Welcome to this month's recording of Evidence of Greatness. This month, we're going to consider an article written by Engstrom, Hernandez, and Gansei. And the article is entitled Vicarious Resilience, a Qualitative Investigation into its Description. So what this article is going to get us to is what exactly is vicarious resilience? And although this article isn't necessarily about solution-focused brief therapy, I'm going to make some connections between this article and solution-focused brief therapy and lessons that we as solution-focused brief therapists can learn from this article. So let's get started. The first thing that I want to talk about is this literature review and just kind of give you some context for where this article is positioned. This article is specifically looking at torture survivors and clinicians who are working with torture survivors. And as a result of kind of this, this significant population that they're working with, they cite other authors that advocate that clinicians can't be neutral. And this means that they can't take in some sense, a completely not knowing stance, but that they have to, that by maintaining or trying to maintain this sense of neutrality, really what's happening is that maintains the status quo. It overlooks the idea of power. It overlooks, the ideas of oppression or dominance, which obviously come into play here for torture survivors. And so we as solution-focused brief therapists, we need to think about how we can kind of come to grips with this idea. Historically, solution-focused brief therapists have kind of taken a stance of neutrality. And I think that I personally agree with these authors that says, we can't really do that, that every question we ask is aimed at gearing the conversation somewhere. We're the experts of the process. We're the experts of creating a solution-focused conversation. Therefore, the questions we ask gear the conversation in that direction. And by so doing, we eliminate the possibility of being neutral. We aim toward the client's desired outcome. We aim toward taking into consideration the systems that person is involved in and the difference that this kind of conversation will not only have on the client, but will also have on their systems. So the first lesson, the first takeaway is that we as solution-focused brief therapists can't really be neutral. That we need to take into consideration in these rich, detailed descriptions, many, many aspects, and we need to weave those things into the conversations that we have. The next point here is that some therapeutic modalities may be inadequate for dealing with torture survivors because of that neutral stance. And again, this might be an argument you hear about why solution-focused brief therapy can't be effective with torture survivors. And again, I would advocate that that's not true, that we as solution-focused therapists don't take a stance of neutrality, but instead we take a stance that oppression is problematic, that discrimination is problematic, that inappropriate use of power is problematic. And therefore, we ask questions around, given that you're in a dysfunctional system, or given that you are dealing with an abuse of power and privilege, how are you managing? How are you coping? What skills and qualities do you have that will help you to navigate a maladaptive system, right? So it's not that we don't believe that systems can't be maladaptive, but the emphasis on how change occurs is not necessarily on analyzing how the systems are maladaptive, but instead talking to our clients about how they can be at their very best and how they will, at their very best, interact with a problematic system. So again, we want to advocate that solution-focused brief therapy can be very effective even in significant situations like this, because we don't take a stance of neutrality. In addition, that last point here is that it talks about how the focus oftentimes in these approaches that are deemed inadequate is too narrow. It's on the personal, it's on the family, and we may miss the political or the larger systemic perspectives. So again, I think that's a challenge to us as solution-focused brief therapists when working with this population, but with other populations where the problem intersects with larger systemic perspectives. We need to bring those larger systemic perspectives into the questions that we ask. And we need to talk about probably what the client's desired outcome is, but also what the system's desired outcome is, and how they're going to navigate the system's desired outcome with what's good for them. So we have the possibility of expanding our questions to more than just the individual or the family who's sitting here in the room with us. And I think that that's an important call to action, is that we be willing to expand the scope of our consideration within these conversations. Next, we're going to get into the methods of how this study was done. And this study was, again, a qualitative study where it's a grounded theory study. And a grounded theory study, it really is looking for new understanding, developing new understanding where there's really minimal theoretical understanding. And so it's really kind of going to the participants, the people who are kind of in the trenches, and saying, can you teach us what you've learned, so that we can adapt theory, we can develop theory so that it's consistent with what you're seeing is working. And I think one of the things that's really important, again, to point out here is that a grounded theory, where we're kind of developing new knowledge and new understanding, that's really a consistent approach with solution-focused brief therapy, where we kind of examine what's working. We do more of what's working. We consider developing new understanding. And so I think, and also that participatory research where the participants are in the ground at the ground level. And so I think this approach, this grounded theory approach, is really a consistent approach with the underlying assumptions about solution-focused brief therapist. So one of the things that we need to consider then is who was involved in this study. There were originally 11 participants of this study, and all of them worked at a treatment center where they decentralized a specific treatment modality. So they were saying a specific modality isn't kind of our emphasis or proving that a specific approach is useful, but instead it was, let's meet these people where they are and try to be helpful to them the best that we can. One of these interviews was thrown out because of technical challenges. So in the end, there were 10 participants who were included. You can see here the breakdown where 7 of the 11 original participants were US born, 2 were Middle Eastern born, 1 Latin American born, and 1 Australian born. Of these, you can kind of see a mix of professions. There were some licensed clinical social workers, there were some marriage and family therapists, and there were doctoral degrees in psychology. And so you can see kind of a variety of mental health professionals who participated in this research. So this research was with the clinicians, not with the clients. And they talked to the clinicians about what was helpful when working with torture survivors. So there were 3 kind of overarching themes that developed from this research. The first of these themes was that being positively affected by that clinicians were positively affected by the resilience of their clients. And also that there was a recognition of the human capacity to thrive, right? And some of the key terms that came out in connection to this theme, you'll recognize as really consistent to solution-focused brief therapy. They talked about that clients were resilient. They talked about strength. They talked about that their clients had a lot of energy or hope or enthusiasm. They talked about the love that kind of carried these clients through, and the heroism with which they had to draw on, and their own resourcefulness. And so you can see in here that all of these words are words that are regularly used to describe solution-focused brief therapy and how we view clients. And so if working with torture survivors or people who have experienced trauma, if we need to kind of draw out this this aspect of our clients, what better way to do that than by using solution-focused brief therapy? In addition, they talked about how there was a co-construction that needed to happen. That as torture survivors or trauma survivors were trying to make sense of their experience and how they were able to cope or manage, that they did this through a co-construction. And again, you can hear laced in here solution-focused brief therapy being a really consistent approach in this regard, where we view our work also as a co-construction. One of the things that I think is really, really valuable here is that they recognized, as they built this co-constructed conversation, that there were possibilities, right? That even though they had experienced atrocities and that they had endured atrocities, there were still possibilities that were worth kind of pursuing. And I think that that's one of the things that's so valuable when we start sessions with what are your best hopes, and we build a conversation around desired outcomes and preferred futures. You hear in that there's a recognition of possibility, that things could get better, that this person or these people could continue to cope. So again, what worked is absolutely consistent with solution-focused brief therapy. The second theme that kind of came out from these interviews is an alteration in perspectives by the therapists about their own lives. They started talking about how they appreciated their own freedom, that their problems kind of all of a sudden got put into perspective, that things could be a lot worse, and it kind of created a sense of gratitude of, I'm grateful that I only am dealing with these things, right? It helped them also to focus on the positive things in their lives, which I think is really, really an important thing and something that we should hold on to. It wasn't just that their problems changed, right? That they became smaller, but it was, there were also strengths, resources, resiliencies in their own life. There was kind of a gratitude for what was going well. And I think through solution-focused conversations, we can help our clients kind of orient to both of these realities. One, that maybe problems are overcomable or they're not as bad as they initially seem. But two, despite problems being present, there are positive aspects about life that we could orient to, that we could analyze and say, what are you doing to maintain these positive things about life? And how could you use some of those skills to manage and deal with things that maybe aren't going so well? And then also, finally, they talked about how experiencing these conversations gave them motivation for facing their own challenges. They would kind of look at their clients and say, if they can manage all of that, I can manage this. And so I think just in having conversations about strengths and resources and resiliencies, it gives us the ability to manage and face the things that are coming or that we're dealing with. And then the final kind of overarching theme was that they valued the therapy work that was performed. Oftentimes when we talk about people who work in these really kind of difficult situations, we talk about things like compassion fatigue. We talk about things like burnout. We talk about not being able to carry on with the work because it's so heavy. But one of the things that they talked about is when they focused on resiliency, when they focused on strength, when they focused on resourcefulness, it provided them with motivation to keep working. And they realized that the work that they were doing was really meaningful. So instead of getting burned out, they got motivated to continue with this work. And I think that's one of the things, again, that's really consistent with solution-focused brief therapy, is that no matter what our clients are dealing with, as we have these kinds of conversations, we can value this work and we can be rejuvenated and we can feel like the work that we're doing is meaningful. So those are some things that are really important, that are consistent with solution-focused brief therapy. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about, they made some distinctions between empathy, post-traumatic growth, and vicarious resilience. And one of the things that they pointed out is that empathy is absolutely necessary for the development of vicarious resilience. That in order for us to become more resilient as we hear the stories of our clients, is that we have compassion. We understand kind of the magnitude of what's going on for them. And then we help them understand how they're dealing with that magnitude, right? And so the first aspect of developing vicarious resilience is actually compassion, right? We can't let these horrible experiences just kind of roll off our back and be like, well, I guess they're dealing with some hard stuff. We really have to kind of get in there and understand how significant these things are. And we have to convey to our clients that understanding, that compassion and that empathy through the questions that we develop. So again, I think that this goes back to that original point of this isn't a work for neutrality. This is a work of really getting in there and really understanding they're dealing with very difficult realities. And as a result, they're simultaneously showing us an amazing ability to cope, an amazing ability to, in many cases, thrive. So empathy is a precursor to resilience, and we need to make sure that we are conveying empathy. Then they kind of made a comparison and a contrast between post-traumatic growth and vicarious resilience, where post-traumatic growth is usually one's spirituality or personal strength or life outlook can be enhanced as a consequence of trauma. In essence, I experience trauma and I manage it, I deal well with it, and therefore I'm stronger, I'm better, right? This is a consistent idea with why we do physical exercise. We put our muscles under strain, under stress, and in some sense we tear those muscles, we induce trauma with the goal of then the muscles repairing themselves and getting larger and getting more capable and getting stronger. And so this post-traumatic growth is that same kind of idea of trauma doesn't always have negative impacts. It can also have positive impacts and growth and increased strength. So we want to make sure that as we interact with people who are dealing with trauma in this way, that we don't forget to talk about growth, that growth that comes post-trauma, right? Again, kind of the distinction here between post-traumatic growth and vicarious resilience is that the post-traumatic growth is on the part of the client, whereas vicarious resilience is on the part of the clinician, right? In addition, in post-traumatic growth, it's about what they've achieved after the trauma, whereas vicarious resilience isn't necessarily linked to development or growth, but in some sense, it's about I become more resilient. I am better because of what you have shared with me. And so there is a slight distinction where the focus on growth is on the part of the client, and the focus on vicarious resilience is on the part of the clinician. But we want to make sure that we talk to our clients about the growth that they have achieved as a result of the trauma that they've endured. So that's it for this article. It's pretty short. It's a pretty easy read, but I think there are some powerful lessons for us as solution-focused practitioners that I want to make sure that we orient to. So get out there and be compassionate, be empathetic, really recognize the incredible capacity that our clients have. Make sure that we're asking them about the growth they've experienced, and then bask in the resilience that can come as a result of hearing amazing stories. So for this month's Evidence of Greatness, go out there and work with people who have experienced atrocity, but witness their amazing strength and abilities.